And these are our beautiful preserved lemons that have been preserving for about 4 weeks now, and I have not tried them. Pretty incredible. Still a bit acidic and bitter, but not like making my whole mouth go like that. So it's quite interesting, and we'll definitely be adding this to today's recipe. Food is arguably the most important resource in Age of Empires 2, but all we see in game is just a single set of numbers. Throughout this series, we will be diving in to see exactly what foods each civilization prepared and ate, and how well I can recreate those recipes. This is Meals of Empires. So first up, let's do a quick overview of the Berbers. The Berbers in Age of Empires 2 represent the native people of North Africa. So that's the Amazigh. So think Morocco, Algeria, the Maghreb region. And people think that's just desert. It's not just desert. And by people, I mean my preconceived notion before doing research was that was just desert along the Mediterranean, but it's not. There is a mountain range that I'm not going to name it yet because that's a trivia question later. I almost slipped up there. The Umayyad Caliphate comes in. The Berbers are already here in Morocco in the mountain range that I'll name later. Then they go across the Strait of Gibraltar into Hispania, where there were just Visigoths living, those that kind of took over the administration after the fall of the Western Roman Empire. And then the Berbers and the Arabs, who were just known as the Moors by the Europeans there at the time, made it all the way up to France. And then Charles Martel was like, not too cool on this. And so there was a battle, another trivia question later. And slowly with the Reconquista, they were pushed back out of Europe and back into North Africa. So you have all that mixing of ingredients, and that's what we'll be cooking today. The Berbers were also responsible for bringing rice into Europe, at least into Spain and then France, and as well as some other ingredients that we'll get touch on. But let's start cooking. Today we are cooking a tajine, which is the name for a clay pot that was traditionally used or is still used in Moroccan Algerian culture in the Maghreb region. And that's just a clay pot, nice, round, not too tall, but it does have a conical cap. Think the shape of a tent that you put on top of it to make sure all the moisture stays in while the ingredients are cooking. Along with that, a lot of people think couscous, but instead I'm going to be making a porridge, and I'll explain why in a little bit once we get to it. And then of course, in Maghreb cultures, cutlery isn't the most common. It's more common now in modern times, but using your fingers and flatbread was a little bit more common as a way to eat that, so we'll be making some flatbread. And the first step for this is somewhat of an optional step, and that is going to be to dice the eggplant and then allow the liquids that are naturally in the fruit to be extruded out by adding a bunch of salt on them.
Aubergine are thought to have been brought to Europe by the Berbers, and you can find that pathway via the etymology, the way the words are pronounced and spelled in each language. The word is vatimjana in Sanskrit. I'm not going to pronounce things perfectly, but you get the general gist. Then in Persian, it's batinjan. In Arabic, you get al-batinjan, al being the definitive article that is added similar to the. And then once it gets into Hispania and Catalan, you get al-Virginia. So the al just gets included as part of the main word. And then it arrives to French, aubergine, and then you just change the accent, aubergine in English.
So the spices we have are coriander, turmeric, and cumin. All these would have been arriving from Asia into North Africa and into al-Andalus. And we're going to be using about a tablespoon of each. And this might seem like quite a bit at this point because we don't have too many ingredients in here. But once everything gets added into the stew, it'll reduce quite a bit in its overall ratio. So allow these spices to roast for a moment while we do the trivia. All right, first trivia question. Many historical Berber people were nomadic. However, modern political tensions have set limits to travel. Can you tell me which two countries in North Africa have not allowed travel across their land border since 1994? You might have to look at Google Maps real quick to take a look at which countries are there if you're not super familiar. So the answer is indeed Algeria and Morocco. To get between the two countries, air travel seems to be the cheapest. But to go from Marrakesh to Algiers, you have to fly through, like, say, Bordeaux. In our New York to Chicago example, that would be going all the way down to Texas. Austin, Texas is about that same distance. 2,560 miles is your new destination distance versus the 726 originally between the two cities. And instead of going from Paris to Rome, you're instead going to Helsinki first and then to Rome. So really going out of the way just because of this land border. So now we are going to work on adding the bulk to our tajine, which will be the carrots, the preserved lemons, the chickpeas, and the aubergines that we are salting. So start with the carrots, since those will take the longest to cook. And original carrots at the time period would generally have been white or purple. We can see from a codex that's found in Byzantine libraries that there were orange carrots at the time. In the overall gene pool of all the carrots, it wasn't the most common. So we have the carrots in. I'm going to add the chickpeas. These chickpeas were cooked yesterday. It's just a matter of soaking them overnight and then cooking them, and then they swell in size. So this is originally half a cup of uncooked dry chickpeas, and then you cook them and they swell twice, so that we have about a cup now. And now our beautiful preserved lemons. I think I'm going to take out 2. I was worried when we were putting these together, when we were doing the Saracens, that the seeds were going to become an issue in the final recipe, but you can see they just have kind of fallen out of the lemon peels. They're very easy to separate now. And so we're just going to take 2 peels and cut them up into little bits, dice it up. I haven't given it too much time to weep. I'm going to give it a quick rinse to try to get some of those juices out. All that eggplant, just throw it all in. I want all of it. There we go. And before I add any liquid, I do want any browning to occur, or as much browning to occur as can be. It can be difficult just because there's not enough airflow coming to the ingredients that are at the bottom. That already looks pretty nice. The turmeric is just kind of coloring everything. Next trivia question. What is the name of the historic battle in modern France between the Franks and the Berbers on the 10th of October 732, which stopped the spread of the Umayyad Caliphate in Europe? The name of the battle is the Battle of Tours. That didn't actually happen in Tours. It was between Tours and Poitiers. Though Poitiers was spelled with a C back then, and just weird, okay. But in between Tours and Poitiers, somewhere along that was a battle. One map that I found online showed that there was 2 rivers like this, and there's a little bridge here to get across the river. And so Charles Martel set up the Frank army right here in between the 2 rivers, so his flanks were protected. And then the Umayyad Caliphate soldiers kind of came up from the south, and they just took a bad fight, is pretty much what it comes down to. Don't take bad fights. So here's an example of a flatbread I made yesterday. Sometimes you would take leftover flatbread and then add it back in to make a porridge. You can tell it's pretty hard. Yesterday when I made it, I didn't let the bread rise long enough, so you can see the yeast hasn't really formed much at all. It's very dense. Here is the dough we are using today. There we go. And I've let it sit for about 3 or 4 hours to allow the yeast in the sourdough to kind of take over. And flatbread could be made either yeasted or unyeasted, depending on the situation. This is yeasted because we're just cooking it at home, but sourdough cultures are hard to manage, to maintain, if you don't have like access to a regular supply of flour or water. Oh, this is pretty sticky. I'm going to put it back down. Put you back down there, bud. So the sourdough flatbreads are going to last quite a bit longer. If you don't have any yeast in it, the shelf life is like a few hours versus a few days if you do have yeast. So we're going to try a variety of cooking methods. I'm going to cook some of the flatbreads in the oven, and I'm going to cook some of them on the pan right here in front of you guys. But the first step is going to be to roll these out into proper shapes. And there's some great videos on YouTube of Berber tribes, or I should say Amazigh tribes, just making bread in the desert. They just find a few branches to make a fire, make a pit, and then mix the ashes and the sand around the bread, making like an impromptu oven, and it just cooks the bread, and you can see like the sand bubbling. A lot of the time, even in modern day, people would take their bread and make it at home. So what I did, and then they would bring it to a communal baker to allow it to do the final cooking process. And there's some great pictures that you can find online as well of people just kind of hanging out outside the bakery, the large oven, waiting for their round of breads to be done. And you'll just have so many loaves, like for an entire town, just all going at the same time inside the bakery. And it's up to the baker to remember whose was whose, find the little identifying marks. And I think the identifying marks for my bread would be, this guy does not know what he's doing. All right, give that a flip. Okay, that's looking decent. So once this is done, we are making the base for our stew, our tajine, which is going to be a porridge. And there are so many different civilizations that would have had a porridge, but this is the first time I'm actually coming to one of those civilizations deciding, yeah, that's what makes sense for this. We are going to make a porridge. And that's just adding wheat in water to create a base for our stew, to give a few more calories and more sustenance to what we're making. Let's see how that other side's going. Okay, it's definitely expanding a bit. So I'm hoping we develop some nice layers in the middle there. There is a cookbook that has been translated. It's from the 1200s. The Berber that was living in al-Andalus, and they fled during the Reconquista. I forget where they ended up. I think in Algeria. It's called The Exiles Cookbook. And one of the, there's a few different porridges, but one of them involves adding garlic at the beginning. Garlic, and I decided to add saffron as well, because that's such a common spice for the region. Third trivia question. What mountain range is found in the Maghreb region, separating the Mediterranean basin from the Sahara Desert, that shares its name with both a Greek titan and an ocean? The name of the mountain ranges, it's the Atlas Mountains. So in Greek mythology, or I guess just Greek culture in general, all the way out west, for you guys it's this side, all the way out west was Atlas, who was holding up the sky, and that was the mountain range that was there for the Greeks at the entrance of the Mediterranean. The name also is used for the Atlantic Ocean. So you think of the Berbers as just people who are living in the desert, but there is also the Atlas Mountains, and you have like full civilizations. It's not just a nomadic empire, people living in the Atlas Mountains all the way up to today, and that's why they're able to produce all these wonderful foods that we have today, like the carrots and the eggplant, because you can't just grow that in the desert, unfortunately. All right, so for our porridge, I need to double check. 1/2 cup of flour with 3 cups of water to make a 1:6 ratio. The great thing about a porridge is it doesn't have to be as specific as for baking. The water is going to evaporate on its own, so the ratio is very much approximate. It's just enough water to whisk this into a smooth consistency. And instead of starting the porridge with just the water and the flour and just making it very plain, I'm adding our crushed garlic and saffron first. And we're going to add that to a little bit of olive oil. That smells so good already. Olive oil is very aromatic. And to clean my fingers of the last little remnants, I'm going to take some old bread and just wipe up my fingers, and that will be part of our porridge. There we go. We'll let that cook for about another minute, and then we'll add in our mixture of flour and water. The Berbers did bring rice to Spain, but when they left Spain during the Reconquista, they didn't really bring it back to Northern Africa. Northern Africa doesn't really have great areas to grow rice. They don't have any like large floodplains for rivers in which to grow rice. How's our tajine going? Let's give it our first taste test. First off, the salt content's good. I'm going to add a little bit more salt for Abby's preferences. The chickpeas and the eggplant together, I don't know if I've ever cooked anything like that before. And I feel like it's a very good pairing. Carrots always great in a soup. Adds some sweetness along with the onions. And then all the spices are kind of just helping hands right now. They're not the star of the show, which is perfect. That's what you want the spices to be doing usually. So yeah, overall, pretty good. There we go. Garnish is very important for a stew. I feel like Otherwise, because everything's homogenous, you want some sort of defining characteristic, something to really look at, something to draw the eye. Because if you just have a stew in a bowl, it's just homogenous thing in a round object. There's nothing to like really focus on. So I think having plenty of cilantro on here, or coriander as it's known in Dutch, will be perfect. All right, last trivia question. The traditional Moroccan tea is made with mint. How many times do you steep and pour the tea in the process of like before you actually get to the final cup? How many steeps does the tea get? How many pours does it get? The correct answer is 3 times. I'll demonstrate even though I don't have any tea. I was thinking of making some Moroccan tea to go with the stream, but because it's pretty late and it is caffeinated, I didn't want to do that. Traditionally, you have your teacup, you put in your green tea, pour it out. The first pour is the spirit. You set that aside. Now all the the green tea leaves have kind of expanded, and so the second one is the wash. You pour that out, you discard it. Then the third pour is what you're actually keeping. Sometimes you put the spirit back in. You always add mint leaves at this point, and you can also add sugar to the level that you want to add it. And then that third pour is what you're actually serving to guests. So 3 pours and 3 steeps for traditional Moroccan tea. And there's great videos on YouTube as well to demonstrate how that process is done. And it's, I don't know, it's kind of relaxing to see as well. And then it just kind of makes your mouth water because you're like, that sounds pretty good right now. Let me finish putting everything together, and we'll get Abby over here to rate everything. And then we'll use our bowl as our serving instrument. And there we go. Now we can see the porridge on the outside, so it'll be good for the photo. Let's add a little bit more over on this side. There we go. Nice and symmetrical. So here we have our wonderful food. You'll see that there is 0 cutlery here, which is traditional. We're going to be using the bread. So here we have a bread that was cooked on the pan with some olive oil, and here we have some bread that was cooked in the oven. I'll give my own feedback on my own cooking later, just not to bias your opinion. Here we have our tajine on top, which is our chickpeas, our carrots, our eggplant, and our preserved lemons as the main components. And then we have the standard onion and garlic aromatics with some spices. Ton of cilantro on top. And then underneath that is our porridge, which is mainly wheat flour and water. But I also added some onions and some saffron to give a little bit of a je ne sais pas quoi, even though that's not the right language.
Je ne sais pas quoi?
Yeah.
Why is it Jell-O?
Well, that's what porridge kind of is.
Porridge is like oatmeal, right?
But that's the thing. You're used to oat porridge, but this is different.
It needs salt.
I forgot to add salt. No. This has salt. I forgot to add salt into the dough earlier.
You always forget to add salt.
I don't know.
It's like the most important ingredient of it.
You know how people will get beers duct taped to their hands in like fraternities and stuff?
Mm-hmm.
I think you need to duct tape salt to my hands so I can't forget about it. What are your initial thoughts?
It's interesting. I feel like I would find this as a dish at a restaurant.
Interesting. All right, I'm ready for ratings.
Okay.
Execution?
8.
8 on execution.
Yeah.
Everything's pretty good. It's just that I forgot to add salt.
And this is kind of doughy.
Yeah, and I didn't do a great job cooking the bread. But everything in the bowl here, you're enjoying?
I wouldn't say I enjoy this, but like...
Yeah, the porridge.
Everything else is...
But it seems like it's on point in terms of like...
Seems like it.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not an expert.
Yeah. And then, should you serve this to your girlfriend?
6.5.
6.5, okay. That seems like what I'd expect you to rate.
Okay.
I think we're on the same page here. I'll give my feedback. I think the porridge is pretty interesting and is tasty because I remembered to add salt. The saffron doesn't come in through that much, I feel like, though I didn't really taste it individually. The tajine, though, the lemon really does come through quite well, and it just gives enough like citrusy acidity That's really nice. It like brings out a lot of flavors, and it just, yeah, I like it. The breads, I need help. The Teutons are coming up soon, and it's just going to be onion soup and sourdough bread, and I'm going to need to practice so much in the next coming days. Next week will be the Teutons, and then after that we'll have a series of offline videos that are pre-recorded for, I think we have the Aztecs, the Persians, the Spanish, and maybe one more civ. Oh, the Huns. That's going to be a fun one. So make sure to like and subscribe, all that fun stuff, so you don't miss any future videos. Next week is Red Bull. Yeah, oh, that's true. Next week is Red Bull, so I'll be doing this on Monday, so the YouTube video will probably be coming out on Wednesday. I'm not trying to compete with Red Bull on viewer numbers.